Have you ever sat in that heavy silence at a family dinner? Here on Bonds and Stories, we retell those moments honest every day, sometimes controversial. Every story is a mirror. Subscribe, join the conversation, and maybe find a little healing. Elena Ward didn't find the truth in a heated argument or a dramatic confession. It waited for her folded small as a secret in the glove compartment of a silver sedan. She was digging for a pack of tissues after Nathan dropped his keys in her lap and rushed back into the house muttering about a work call. The receipt she unfolded crackled like a whisper artisanal rosé from a boutique shop 2 towns over, chocolate-dipped strawberries, and a wedge of aged manchego. The date was last Friday. The boutique sat 5 miles from their lakeside cabin at Onyx Lake and 30 from their home. Nathan hated cheese. He claimed it tasted like a damp attic. He also hated long drives, loose nails, and anything resembling a tool belt. For 8 years, Elena had learned the choreography of his preferences the way a pianist learns scales without thinking. Lately, though, he had acquired new enthusiasms. Maintenance weekends, he called them, voice bright with virtue, as he tossed a duffel into the trunk. Leaky gutters. Porch rails that apparently needed sanding. He left early, came back late, smelled of unfamiliar cologne, and moved around the kitchen humming like someone who has solved a private puzzle. "You're building a religion out of a hunch," he said the night before when Elena had asked why he needed to leave at dawn. Calm voice, even smile. "You're chasing a phantom itch. There's nothing there." Elena met her reflection the next morning, and it did not flinch. 39. Brown hair she usually wore half-pinned while teaching Blue Eyes that her juniors at Larkspur High insisted made her look younger than she felt. She taught fiction by teaching students to notice how authors hide truth in gestures and omissions, how a single prop can tilt a scene. She turned the rosé receipt in her fingers. Props have motives too. Someone had purchased Celebration in a bottle and carried it toward a place that was supposed to be theirs. She called in sick, something she had done only once in 5 years when the flu pinned her to the couch. The department chair, accustomed to Elena's reliability, merely told her to rest. Nathan kissed her cheek as he left a perfunctory press already halfway to the driveway. He said he'd go straight from the accounting office to the cabin, same as the last 6 weekends. The front door closed with the soft finality of a book you already know the ending to. Elena waited half an hour, then moved briskly through the house, as if the rooms were paragraphs she needed to finish before the bell. Overnight bag, charger, dark jacket, a small composition notebook and a pen, old habits of a teacher who steadies herself by writing down what she sees. From the hall closet, she lifted a pair of compact binoculars she'd borrowed to supervise the spring birding club. There were cardinals in March. There would be other sightings in September. She texted Cassie Tran and didn't bother with preambles. "Can you come? I need a second pair of eyes." Cassie had started at Larkspur the same year as Elena. Biology and literature, 2 ways to classify life. Where Elena balanced students' essays in neat stacks, Cassie kept her lab drawers labeled within an inch of their lives. Loyal to the bone sharp when it mattered, she arrived 25 minutes later in black jeans and a windbreaker. Curly hair whipped into a knot, expression already set to problem-solving. "Tell me," she said, sliding into Elena's entryway like a verdict. Elena held up the receipt. "The shop is 5 miles from the lake. He's been repairing the deck every weekend for 2 months. Nathan couldn't tell a socket wrench from a spatula last year. And now look." She gestured toward the fragrance cloud that still hung faintly in the hall, spiced and expensive and not his. "I never trusted him," Cassie said, not unkindly. "Where do we sit?" "The service road by the North Trail," Elena replied. "From there it's a short hike. We can watch the back deck through the birches." The drive carved a gray seam through early autumn. Fields dulled to straw maples starting to burn at the edges. Elena kept her eyes on the road and her mind on facts. Nathan's calendar client dinners had multiplied. His gym bag smelled like cedar and something citrusy. He had started whistling in the shower. None of it proved anything. Yet all of it arranged itself into a sentence that kept finishing itself whether she wanted it to or not. They parked where the pavement surrendered to gravel and walked the rest. The woods at Onyx Lake knew Elena's footsteps. In summer, she read on the back steps with her knees bare to the sun, while Nathan watched baseball and asked when dinner would be. When they bought the place 5 years ago, she painted the living room a color called Wheatfield and framed student doodles that made her laugh. She had mended split screens, scrubbed soot from the stone fireplace, stitched their life into the cottage stitch by stitch. It was a sanctuary, and sanctuaries she had learned from books and from life are precisely where people go to lie to themselves. "Slow?" Cassie whispered as the trees thinned. The cabin sat ahead, pine-roofed and honey-colored in the late light, fronted by a small gravel drive, and beyond that, the square of lake visible through reeds glittering like a coin. Elena crouched behind a lash of ferns and steadied the binoculars against a trunk. Nathan's sedan was already there, dark hood ticking with heat. A second car waited beside it, low, red, a convertible she had never seen. Elena did not feel her heart break. She felt something click into place, a door she would no longer pretend was locked. They watched for nearly an hour, the minutes stretching thin as blown glass. The back door opened a sliver, then wider. Nathan stepped onto the deck carrying two stemmed glasses, the rosé pale as a joke. He looked freshly showered hair, neat, a shirt she had never seen before. Behind him walked a woman in a dress that gathered light to itself and refused to give any back, her hair the color of unwrapped straw, her laugh breaking the quiet like a tossed stone. Elena had imagined many faces in the past month, angular and severe, clever and bored, pretty in the way a magazine tells you to be ordinary, in the way real life insists. This face was not more than those and not less. It was simply a face that was not hers, drinking the wine Elena had not bought on a deck she had sealed in June with a brush she still hadn't cleaned entirely. Cassie's breath went sharp beside her. There it is. Nathan leaned in and kissed the woman, as if his mouth had been invented that afternoon for exactly this purpose. No hesitation, no glance left or right. He touched the small of her back with familiarity. They toasted nothing in particular and surveyed the trees as if they owned them. Elena breathed in, breathed out, and let the anger arrive without apology. A squirrel scolded them from a branch. Somewhere, a boat motor stitched the lake, then fell quiet. The woman said something that made Nathan laugh in a way Elena had not heard in months. He had been rationing that laugh at home, as if she hadn't paid her taxes properly. "Do you want to leave?" Cassie asked. Elena lowered the binoculars. The deck boards, the railing, the lantern she had bargained down at a flea market, every detail presented itself with cruel clarity. On the table sat a small plate of strawberries and pale cubes of cheese sweating in the sun. He would make this their ritual, Elena realized. He would carry it into next week and the week after until the ritual felt like truth. "No," Elena said, "not yet." They stayed until the light tilted amber. When the couple went back inside, careless and sure of the air holding them, Elena finally stood, leg muscles buzzing from the crouch. She did not cry. The tears had lined up earlier, obedient as students before homeroom, and now they were dismissed. What she felt was steadier than sorrow and colder than shock. On the walk back through the birches, Cassie kept her voice low. "What are you thinking? That I will not be told I'm imagining things ever again," Elena said. Her tone surprised her with its evenness. "I am done being the woman who apologizes for noticing." They reached the car at the service road and sat in the cooling silence for a moment before Cassie turned the key. Elena folded the rosé receipt and slid it into the notebook, then wrote the facts the way she would instruct a student to outline a chapter: time date, the cars, the color of the dress, the angle of a hand on a back. The act steadied her. "Evidence can be a sort of prayer. What do you need?" Cassie said. It was not a question of sympathy. It was a question of inventory. "Your eyes," Elena said. "Your calm. Maybe your trunk of mysterious science teacher supplies." A corner of her mouth lifted. "And your discretion. You have all three," Cassie replied, pulling onto the road. "And a guest room if you don't want to go home yet." "I want my home back," Elena said, "but not to sit in it and pretend." The maples along the shoulder flamed a little brighter, as if agreeing. She watched her own hands resting quiet on her knees. They were capable hands, grading essays, folding fitted sheets, coaxing a crooked picture frame into level. She had used them to build a refuge. She could use them to do other work. When Cassie dropped her off the porch light, Elena had set on a timer, blinked on, indifferent and punctual. Inside the house held the imprint of ordinary life, a mug with yesterday's tea line, a sweater on the back of a chair, two shoes not touching on the mat. Elena opened the windows to let the evening in. She laid the receipt on the kitchen table and placed a paperweight on it, the smooth river stone Nathan had found on their first walk at the lake, and handed to her grinning like a boy. The stone held fast. The paper did not flutter. She texted Cassie, "Thank you." Then she turned off the living room lamp and stood for a while with the dark. In the classroom, Elena often told her students that a story reveals itself when you stop trying to make it behave. She did not think about stories now. She thought about the feel of the fern frond against her wrist, as she steadied the binoculars, the taste of metal in her mouth when the kiss happened, the way silence lengthened around a lie until it became its own weather. At the bathroom mirror, she met her own gaze again. It was the same face she had seen 12 hours earlier, and a different one. She washed away the day and let her hair fall, and when she turned out the light, she knew with a certainty that did not require anyone's permission what she had seen and what it meant. She did not rehearse speeches. She did not draft declarations. She placed the composition notebook beside the bed, capped the pen, and lay down, listening to the house settle into its bones. Somewhere far from Onyx Lake, but still too near, a man laughed in a room that was not his. Elena closed her eyes and let the evidence arrange itself into a quiet she could hold. She would not look away. Morning came with a slate sky and a hush that made the neighborhood sound padded, as if the day had been wrapped to keep from breaking. Elena poured coffee she barely tasted and reread the notes she'd made the night before. Facts, not theories. She added 2 more lines, tiny clarifications that steadied her hand, then closed the notebook and slid it into her bag. At school, the corridor smelled of dry erase markers and autumn coats. Her juniors trickled into room 212, laughing at something that lived entirely between them. Elena taught the lesson she had planned point of view in short fiction, and heard herself ask all the right questions, while a second Elena stood behind her shoulder, alert to another story unfolding outside the syllabus. When the bell rang, Emma Morales hovered at the side of the desk with that careful teenage courtesy that telegraphs real concern. "You okay, Ms. Ward?" Elena stacked the day's worksheets and offered the kind of smile that deflects without lying. "I will be. Thank you for asking." At lunch, she ate an apple at her desk and stared through the narrow window at a sliver of cloud. She did not text Nathan. She did not search the boutique's website to see what else they sold. She printed a quiz for Thursday and sent the file to the copy room, then tidied the cart of classroom novels with more attention than the task demanded. The ordinary labor of teaching felt like ballast. She needed ballast. Cassie appeared in the doorway after last bell, tapping the jamb twice with her knuckles like a code. "Lab's open." The biology room was warm, the way rooms with machines always are, humming lightly under the fluorescence. Cassie locked the door behind them and set a canvas satchel on her desk. There was a neatness to her movements that Elena found reassuring, efficient, unhurried, exact. "We're not playing vigilantes," Elena said as much to herself as to Cassie. "We're establishing the truth in a way that can't be narrated away." "Good," Cassie said. "Truth likes witnesses." From the satchel, she lifted a handful of items Elena recognized from field trips and school fairs, a small motion-activated camera no larger than a matchbox, 2 adhesive clips, a tiny battery pack with a single blinking light. Cassie lined them up like punctuation. "They'll hold a charge long enough," she said, "and they don't record audio." Living room and kitchen. Common spaces only. No bedroom, no bath. "Thank you," Elena said, relief loosening something behind her ribs. The rule anchored her. "There's also a 3rd camera." Cassie added, aimed toward the hallway, just the door frame. "It will show who enters and leaves the bathroom, nothing more." Elena nodded. "Acceptable." They worked out small logistics, the angle of a bookshelf, the height of a cabinet molding on the whiteboard, with simple drawings that looked almost like a child's map. Elena surprised herself by noticing details she would never have registered a week ago, the field of view of a lens, the way a plant's fronds could hide a black dot. The same part of her mind that diagrammed sentences began to diagram rooms. "Tonight?" Cassie asked. "Tonight," Elena said. The word felt both heavy and clean. She drove home through a gray that flirted with rain, made a simple dinner, and changed into dark clothes that did not announce themselves. When she texted, "On my way," Cassie responded with a pin to a coffee shop halfway to Onyx Lake. They met under the soft bell of a pendant light and spoke for 10 minutes, as if planning a field trip, who held which bag where to park, what to do if headlights approached the drive. When they got up, their cups left pale rings on the table like two moons. The road to the lake was emptier than it had been. Saturday weekday traffic dissolved into a thin line of taillights. At the service road, Cassie cut the engine and let the night settle around them. The woods breathed cold and leaf-sweet. Elena's heart beat in her throat. Not panic exactly, but the body's way of ringing a bell. They walked. The path knew their feet. At the edge of the clearing, Elena paused to listen the small stitch of crickets a waterbird's rubbery. Call the distant motor of a truck on the county highway. No voices. No lights in the cabin windows. She keyed the back door and felt the familiar bolt turn the click of belongings she had always loved and now felt like a dare. The cottage had the stillness of a held breath. Wheat field walls, the lamp with a linen shade, the painting of the lake she bought at a craft fair, because the sky was wrong in a way she found honest. Elena resisted the urge to straighten the stack of coasters and went instead to the shelf near the window, her fingers remembering where the knots in the wood sat. Cassie moved to the kitchen with the smoothness of a practiced second light on her feet, already half invisible. They placed the cameras without ceremony. The first nestled between paperbacks and a modest glass globe, angled to take in the couch, the deck door, the reach of the table. The second rode the lip of a cabinet where the molding cast a friendly shadow. The third kept watch on the hallway threshold like a doorkeeper mindful of boundaries. Elena checked each view on her phone and saw her own body as a thin, monochrome shape bending and rising inside rooms she had painted. The effect was strangely sobering. She could be a character in a story, and the author who framed her at the same time. "Done," Cassie whispered. Elena breathed out and looked toward the doorway that led to the bedroom. She did not cross it. There are thresholds you honor even when the person you honored them with has not. They did small, wordless things that would curdle romance without breaking the law. Or the house, Elena gathered the few toiletries Nathan kept under the sink, duplicate items no one would miss, and zipped them into a spare tote. Cassie found a laundry basket with 2 soft t-shirts Elena recognized as her own, and folded them and set them in a different room, half to clear surfaces, half to reclaim. From Nathan's narrow closet, Elena removed a shirt she had bought on sale, and never liked on him, and laid it flat on the bed, as if to iron it with her palm. Then she opened the drawers of the nightstand and looked not for secrets, but for absence. No photos. No token left by anyone but them. In the kitchen, Cassie paused with her hand on the refrigerator handle. "May I?" "Yes," Elena said. There were limes, a bottle of mineral water, a tub of hummus opened long enough ago to have formed a skin. In the drawer, a corkscrew with a polished wooden handle, a ring of spare keys, a folded cloth napkin stained with red that Elena refused to interpret. She closed the drawer gently. On the counter beneath the cupboard where they kept tea sat Elena's favorite mug, the blue one with the tiny chip at the lip. She could not say how she knew it was hers, and had not been used here, only that she knew the way you know the difference between a song you have heard and one you have not. She lifted it, wiped an invisible speck from its rim, and set it back. Cassie busied herself with a small toolkit. Nothing dramatic, nothing bright. She scraped a bit of gunk from the track of the sliding glass door and oiled a hinge that had squealed since July. The kindness of such ordinary care made Elena's eyes sting. She blinked it away. They stepped out onto the deck to make sure the camera could see the door. The night above Onyx Lake had cleared, stars opened like pinpricks in velvet. The railing Elena had sealed in June held the light like old honey. Somewhere across the water, a radio murmured for a few seconds and clicked off. Cassie leaned on her forearms. "Do you want me to say anything generous about him to balance the ledger?" "No." "Good." They stayed there long enough to let their pulse slow. 2 silhouettes looking at nothing. Anyone else could see, then went back inside and turned each lamp to the brightness they would normally use. They left the house as they found it, no trace of entry beyond what domestic life always leaves: a fingerprint on a glass, the ghost of breath on a window. In the yard, Elena stooped and pinched the head off a dandelion that had outlasted the lawnmower. She didn't know why it felt important, only that it did. On the path through the birches, Cassie's phone buzzed once. She silenced it without looking. "I have office hours before first period tomorrow," she said softly, as if the forest might grade the sentence. "If you need to hand off any—" She didn't complete the thought. "I'll manage," Elena said. "Thank you." They reached the car. The clock on the dash glowed later than it felt. They drove half the way in silence. Then Cassie spoke in that dry, precise timbre Elena had always associated with her lab voice. "If you find yourself narrating excuses in his register, write them down in yours." "It helps." "I will," Elena said. Also, Cassie added a small smile in her words. "You still owe me the ending to the story you started for the Lit Fair, the one with the library roof and the hidden mural." "Don't abandon your characters." Elena huffed a laugh she didn't know she had. Noted. Back home, the porch light blinked on again, punctual as ever. Elena set her bag by the door and stood in the entry listening for a sound she couldn't name. The house responded by being a house-settling, humming holding. She showered, sat at the table with the notebook, and wrote in a steady hand, "Wednesday, Yeen arrived. House empty. Cameras placed. Common spaces only. No breach of private areas. Kitchen ordinary contents. Deck visible from living room lens. Reclaim 2 shirts toiletries. No wreckage. No dramatic symbolism except what the heart insists on finding." She closed the book and put it under a stack of mail. The decision not to watch the feeds overnight sat beside her like an umbrella she might or might not open. She brushed crumbs from the table into her palm and carried them to the sink. When she turned off the light, the kitchen window reflected her face for a heartbeat. A woman with damp hair and a mouth said in a line that was neither smile nor scowl, "Thursday unspooled in its small rituals hall duty." A meeting that could have been an email, a student stopping by to ask if the extra credit poem could be about grief, but not like in a cheesy way. Elena said yes, and watched the girl's shoulders lower a fraction, as if permission had a temperature. Between tasks, she glanced at her phone once or twice to confirm the little icons that meant the cameras were alive. She did not open the app. Around noon, Nathan texted big client dinner tonight. "Don't wait up. Might crash near the office." The words wore his habitual casualness, a domestic keylight that tries to hide bad blocking. Elena did not reply. She printed the Friday quiz and marked the questions she would change if they turned out too easy. After school, Cassie found her in the English office and leaned a hip against the filing cabinet. "Status report," stable Elena said, which is to say quiet. "Quiet is a status," Cassie said. "Loud has its place too." She squeezed Elena's shoulder and left a smudge of chalk on the sleeve of her sweater that Elena did not wipe away. Twilight leaned against the windows on the drive home. Elena found herself narrating the neighborhood like a book she'd read as a child, the man on the corner who watered his hedges as if he were conducting a small orchestra, the dog who never barked the house with the porch swing that looked like a sentence trailing off. In her kitchen, she heated soup and ate standing at the counter. When the bowl was empty, she rinsed it and placed it where she always placed it. The choreography of a life returning to itself. Only then did she open the app. The living room appeared in grayscale, still as a stage before actors arrive. The small green dot in the corner reported time, date, temperature. Elena watched for a minute, felt silly. Watched another, felt less silly. She slid to the kitchen view. Dark window, the outline of the table, the faint square of the deck door beyond. The hallway view, a rectangle of floor, the blank frame of the bathroom door like a pause. She closed the app and set the phone face down. In the bedroom, she changed into a soft t-shirt and put her hair in a loose braid. She lay still and listened to rain arrive softly at last, just enough to lay the dust. Somewhere a car passed, then another. The house ticked. Her breathing evened. In the morning, she would teach vocabulary words that once belonged to sailors, Lee sound fathom, and stand at the board while teenagers tried them on and made them mean something else. She would smile at jokes that misfired and at two that landed. She would make a note to buy new dry erase markers. The day would hold. So would she. The lake kept its own counsel. Friday moved like a careful hand across a page. Elena taught her classes, wrote an extra credit prompt on the board in a tidy green script, and nodded through an afternoon meeting that tacked itself to the day without adding meaning. At dismissal, the building spilled teenagers into light rain and bus exhaust. She drove home with the radio low and the window cracked, the weather rinsing the edges of things. At 5:30, she set a bowl of soup beside her notebook and opened the app. The living room bloomed in grayscale couch lamp the rectangle of the deck door. Empty. A moment later, motion flickered the hallway view, caught a dark figure crossing left to right carrying a duffel. Nathan's shoulders square stride familiar even in monochrome. He appeared in the living room and placed a grocery bag on the table. He moved as if alone, easy in his ownership of the spacehead, bent over small tasks, pulling a cork, lighting a candle, smoothing a folded cloth. He vanished toward the bedroom, returned with a set of sheets that floated pale in his arms. Elena watched without leaning closer. Facts, not theories. At 5:02 p.m., the doorframe registered a second body, long hair, slim jacket, a small suitcase wheeled at her side. The hallway camera caught the angle of her chin and the neat efficiency with which she shrugged from her coat. Nathan met her in the living room and lifted 2 glasses. In grayscale, rosé looks like water, but the way they held the glasses made the liquid mean what it meant. On the kitchen view, their figures slid past in halves and thirds, the shorthand of intimacy Elena had once known in that room, and could read without wanting to. He stirred something on the stove. She leaned against the counter and laughed at nothing Elena could hear. In the living room, they sat close, the distance between their knees measured in inches and then less. The deck door reflected them back to themselves. They would not have noticed. When they disappeared down the hallway, Elena set the phone face down and stood. The house around her behaved like itself. She washed her bowl, wiped the counter, opened and closed the refrigerator to check nothing had moved. She answered an email from the guidance office and watered the plant that always forgot its own thirst. Then she returned to the app and placed the phone on the table as if it were a metronome. The screen stayed dull and still until the timestamp ticked past 2 in the morning. A light blinked on in the hallway view. The woman hurried across the frame in an oversized t-shirt, one hand at her scalp, fingers digging. In the bathroom doorway, she paused. Even in low resolution, Elena saw the startle when she caught herself in the mirror. The woman leaned forward, hair falling. Under the harsh bathroom bulb, the strands looked wrong, brassy, uneven, the kind of color that doesn't belong to a person so much as to a mistake. She touched it as if heat might come away on her fingers. Nathan's silhouette joined hers, bare arms, shoulders tight. They spoke, mouths forming shapes Elena could not hear, and the woman's hands rose again, this time to her forearms. She scratched with a concentration that read as desperation, even in grainy black and white. Nathan tugged open the cabinet, knocked something loose, shut it again too hard. The doorframe cut them in half. The camera recorded halves. In the living room feed, a lamp flared. Nathan paced. He bent to scan the rug rubbing at his neck, then his wrist, then the back of his knee. The woman re-entered, hair scraped into a rough knot, and swatted at her calf. They lifted couch cushions, shook a throw, lifted it again. He pressed his palm to his hairline and stared at nothing, then at everything. On the kitchen view, a drawer opened, then another. He brought a glass to his mouth and swallowed, the movement of his throat visible in profile. The woman scratched harder. Elena swallowed and found that her own scalp itched in useless sympathy. Dawn unstitched the room by degrees. At 5:14, the hallway camera caught the woman moving fast. Street clothes bag clutched high, mouth a thin bar. Nathan followed a pace behind, shirt half tucked, talking with hands. She didn't turn. The front door opened off camera. Her suitcase wheel clipped the frame, bounced, vanished. 10 seconds later, the living room held only Nathan and the dull proof of morning. He stilled then, as if the light had pinned him. Elena watched him inventory the room with new eyes, the couch, the deck door, the bookshelf. He set his hands on his hips and exhaled in a way she could recognize even at this distance. When he moved toward the shelf, Elena felt the odd, precise pain of déjà vu. He was looking not at spines, but at surfaces. He lifted the small globe and turned it, set it down, slid a line of paperbacks an inch, touched the modest glass box that hid a camera, and frowned at the unfamiliar weight. He tilted it and froze. The feed's tiny lens captured his face, looking almost straight into it, eyebrows raised, mouth parted, not in surprise so much as recognition. Elena didn't breathe. He set the box down carefully and scanned the molding above the cabinets. The kitchen feed jostled, tipped, went to a gray square with the word lost in the corner. 1 heartbeat, 2. The living room stayed live. He returned there and sat on the edge of the coffee table, shoulders rounded. He spoke. Elena saw the shape of her name twice on his lips, and then he lifted his phone. A text arrived. I know you can see this. I'm leaving the place as is and going to find somewhere else to sleep. We need to talk when you're ready. I'm sorry. Another followed before she had formed a reply. I'll stay away from the house. Tell me how to proceed. On the living room feed, he stood, rubbed at his forearm, gathered a few items with no order, then stopped and let his hands fall. He unplugged the lamp as if the gesture mattered. He checked the deck door, walked into the hallway, and did not come back. The timestamp kept counting. The open room held its breath and then exhaled empty. Elena put the phone down and pressed her palms to the table until the bolts of the world felt snug again. The apology sat on the screen in a neat bubble as legible and insufficient as a label. She got up, filled a glass with water, drank half, and set it beside the composition notebook. The house made its small, faithful noises. The quiet inside her rearranged itself. She answered when she could make the words true. I saw what I saw. I will let you know when a conversation is possible. Do not go to Onyx Lake. He responded with a single word, understood. Later, when the rain drifted sideways again, and the afternoon folded itself small, Elena took a walk around the block. The hydrangeas on Kincaid bowed under the weather and stood up again. A boy on a bicycle took the corner too fast and righted himself with a delighted whoop. When she came home, she opened the app to confirm what she already knew: 2 rooms holding still. She closed it and sat on the rug and sorted a stack of papers into 3 piles graded to grade to return. She found a sentence in an essay that tried hard and wrote with her favorite pen, "Keep going." Evening thinned into night. Texts from colleagues pinged and were answered or not depending on their weight. Cassie wrote simply, "Here if needed." Elena typed, "Thank you," and set the phone aside. She showered, braided her hair again, and left the windows cracked to the rain. In the bedroom, she placed the notebook on the nightstand and the rosé receipt beneath it. The paper made a small sound as it slid into place. She slept in bands, surfacing once around 3, to a quiet so thorough it felt curated. The house held, the lake miles away, and fully itself held. When morning diluted the blinds, she rose, poured coffee, and stood at the sink until the cup steamed her face. The app showed 3 hospitable rectangles and the slow fingertips of dust in a shaft of light. Nothing moved. Her phone buzzed on the counter, a calendar alert for the vocabulary quiz, an email about copy or toner, a message from Nathan that asked nothing and confirmed nothing. Elena silenced the sound and reached for the sweater with Cassie's chalk smudge still on the sleeve. She left it there. The mark meant something she did not need to name. Outside, the maple at the curb had shifted another shade toward flame. Elena locked the door behind her and went to teach her first class. The day opened its mouth and spoke. She answered. Saturday wore its edges down until there was only the middle of the day and the work of occupying it. Elena graded the vocabulary quizzes, wrote 2 notes of encouragement in the margins that felt like small necessary stitches, and stacked the papers in the order she would hand them back. She watered the fern in the kitchen twice because she couldn't remember the first time. When rain returned, she let it. Nathan texted just after noon, "I'm at the Lakeview Inn. I'll wait for your word." No pressure. I'll respect whatever you decide. She stood at the sink with the phone in her hand and did not answer. The cottage feeds remained empty rectangles. The house sounded like a place where nothing had ever happened, and every ordinary thing always had. At 4, she put on the sweater with a chalk smudge and took a walk. The neighborhood smelled of wet leaves and pears going soft on a tree no one harvested. She followed the sidewalk past the house with the porch swing that looked like a sentence trailing off and kept going until her feet made a loop back to herself. When she turned onto her street, the porch light had already flicked on timed obedience. At 5:30, she texted, "Come at 6. We will talk here." The reply came almost immediately, "I'll be there." She made tea. She didn't plan to drink. Set 2 cups on the table anyway, and opened the living room window an inch to let in the smell of rain on pavement. At 6 sharp, Nathan's car stopped in front of the house. He didn't knock at once. The delay made the second between the bell and the handle turning feel longer than it was. He looked smaller. Some of that was the light, some of it the posture of a man who had misjudged a boundary and walked nose first into it. His hair was no longer the alarming color it had been on Elena's screen, but it was not what it had been either, an in-between shade that refused to commit. The bites had faded to a scatter of pale dots. He carried nothing but his keys. "May I come in?" he asked, voice careful. "You may," she said, and stepped aside. They sat with the low table between them. Elena did not offer tea. Nathan did not ask. For a minute, the room held the dense quiet that comes right before a summer storm. She let the quiet belong to the room, and not to her fear. "I won't pretend," he said. "You know enough, probably more than enough." "I know what I saw," she said, "and what I've lived." He nodded, throat working. "I am sorry." Elena did not move. "For being caught, or for the thing itself?" "For the thing itself," he said. "And for the way I made you question the ground you stood on. I said you were inventing problems to scratch at." "I knew better. I said it anyway." He held her gaze, and it did not feel like a tactic. It felt like a man choosing not to look away from the mess he had made. Elena registered that and didn't soften to it. "How long?" "4 months," he said. "It started at a work event. Texts. Drinks." The water rose while I stood there saying it wasn't flooding. "Her name?" Elena asked. He said it. The syllables sat between them like a figurine neither of them wanted. Elena regarded the name without picking it up. "Why the cabin?" she asked. He exhaled. "I told myself it was private. Off the grid. No chance of running into coworkers. The other truth, less flattering, more accurate, is uglier. The cabin meant more to you than to me. Bringing her there felt like taking control of something I had convinced myself didn't belong to me. It was stupid. It was also true." She watched him say it and felt the interior wince of a recognition she hadn't wanted to earn. "You took what was mine to make it yours," she said, not as an accusation but as an anatomy. Nathan nodded once. "Yes. Did you take her anywhere else that was ours?" Her voice stayed level. "No." "Is it finished?" "Yes," he said. She made that clear. "I would be lying if I said I ended it nobly. It ended because everything collapsed in a way I engineered by being careless and cruel." Elena allowed the sentence to settle. "There will be no cottage for you," she said, and the language surprised her by being as formal as it felt. "That place is no longer a shared noun. It is mine. I'll have it cleaned and repainted and whatever else needs doing. But you won't be there. Do you understand?" "I do," he said. "I won't go near it." "And the house here," she said. "You'll stay away for a while." "I have a room at the inn," he replied. "I'll make it work." He set his hands flat on his knees. "What do you need from me right now?" "Accuracy," she said. "No rounding off. If I ask, answer. If you don't know, say you don't." "Okay." She asked 2 more questions she had written in her notebook and not looked at since were there others before. Did anyone else know? He answered no to the first, and to the second he gave a wince that admitted yes, one colleague had suspected, and had kept the suspicion in the useless way people sometimes do. Something in Elena nodded without becoming anything like relief. She sat back. The room felt bigger. "Leave your house key on the table," she said. "Keep your car key. Take what you need tonight. The rest can wait." He set the brass key down like a small, rare coin. "May I say one more thing?" "You may say it," she said. "I don't have to carry it. I deserve the mess on my head and hands," he said, and the corner of his mouth lifted not with humor, but with a kind of grim admission. "The rest I have to learn to live in. That's mine, not yours." She nodded once. "Good." He stood, then paused. "Do you want me to—" She didn't let him finish. "I will reach out if I want anything." Until then, silence. "Understood." He stepped toward the door, stopped, and turned back just long enough to let the weight of regret show without making it the center of the room. Then he left. The door closed with the softness of a thing she had always liked about this house. The quiet that followed wasn't triumphant. It wasn't empty either. It had furniture. Elena moved through the rooms in a deliberate loop, as if taking attendant's lampchair window, the framed map of the county fairgrounds she'd bought for $1, because the printing colors were wrong in a way she trusted. In the bedroom, she placed the composition notebook in the drawer and the rosé receipt under it. She slid the drawer shut, as if closing a stage curtain. Not the end of anything, only a boundary. The week that followed learned her new rhythms. She woke before her alarm and let the radio murmur the weather without listening. She taught seniors who argued about whether a character's silence was cowardice or strength, and let them be wrong long enough to locate rightness themselves. She ate toast standing up, attended a faculty meeting about copier codes, and laughed once to her surprise at a joke about parking passes. Cassie kept close without circling. She left a Tupperware of soup on Elena's desk with a sticky note that read simply nourishment. She sat beside Elena at lunch, grading essays on cells and commas, and when silence wanted to say too much, Cassie broke it with something small and solid, a description of a student who discovered a love of mushrooms that had nothing to do with eating them, a headline about whales finding each other with low frequencies that traveled farther than the ocean's noise. On Thursday, Elena called a service for the cottage. On Saturday, she drove to Onyx Lake with a thermos and a roll of painter's tape. The exterminators had done their work. The house smelled faintly medicinal, then not at all. She opened every window. The deckboards held their patience. She pulled nails that had lifted over time, sanded a splintered edge on the bench, and labeled boxes with a black marker until the letters steadied her. In the afternoon, she put on an old t-shirt and painted the living room not Wheatfield, but a color the label called Prairie Light. The difference was subtle, but real, a tone less buttery, more air. In a closet, she found the shirt she had lain flat on the bed the night she and Cassie had placed the cameras. She folded it and set it in the donation pile. On a shelf, she set 3 rocks she had picked from the lake, the first summer dull, gray, mottled pink one veined with white. A small altar to geological patience that answered to no one. She slept there that night in new sheets that still whispered when she turned. Wind moved the trees. An owl made a sound like a question no one needed to answer. Elena woke once before dawn and stood at the window with the thermos warm in her hands. The lake did what lakes do, it kept what it kept, and reflected what it could. When school resumed on Monday, she wore a blouse with a small print and told her first period class to find a sentence in their assigned story that meant more than it admitted. Hands went up. A boy who never spoke said quietly that sometimes a character puts a mug down, and that is the whole weather of a scene. Elena wrote that on the board, the whole weather of a scene, and underlined it. Weeks stacked. The chalk smudge faded from her sweater and she missed it. Sometimes late, she opened the app and looked at the cottage rooms, not because she expected movement, but because stillness had become its own proof. Nathan sent a message every 2 or 3 days that asked nothing. Logistics bills, a forwarded notice about a dentist appointment that needed rescheduling. She replied when the reply was useful and not otherwise. Her name appeared in his thread in small blue bubbles with very little air around them. 3 months after the living room conversation, she texted him. Coffee. Public place, 1 hour. She named a cafe that had generous tables and a tin ceiling that made the sound of cups feel like weather rather than talk. He arrived on time, hands visible, a jacket Elena had not seen before that did not attempt style. He waited to sit until she nodded. They ordered, and when the coffees came, they wrapped their fingers around warmth like people who remembered winter. I'm not here to re-argue anything, she said. I'm here to confirm the facts as they are now and see if there is anything to be done with them. He nodded. Facts. I've been in the hotel since that night. I'm working and paying my share of what we built. I haven't been back to the lake. I've stopped lying by omission. I see what I did more clearly, which doesn't repair it. I'm saying it anyway. They spoke the way people speak when both know the room's furniture and are trying not to bump it. He did not ask for forgiveness like a pass. She did not offer it like a performance. When she described repainting the living room and setting the 3 stones on the shelf, he didn't reach for metaphors. He nodded once as if respecting the shape of a simple sentence. After an hour, she said, "That's enough for today." They stood. He thanked her for the coffee and meant it. On the sidewalk, Wynne pulled at a napkin someone had dropped, then lost interest. Elena watched it settle in the gutter and felt nothing moral about it, only the physics. The work of living resumed. Counseling, on a recommendation from the English chair, happened in an office that smelled faintly of eucalyptus and had a rubber plant that seemed to approve of their efforts. They spoke to a third person whose job was to carry words back and forth without losing any. Some sessions made Elena's shoulders lower a fraction by the end, others made her jaw ache. She left each one and went to class and taught whatever was in front of her meter revision the difference between plot and story, because those things held even when other things did not. Spring came forward, as if it had been waiting behind the curtain for a cue it was tired of missing. The maple on Elena's street leafed in a green that embarrassed winter. She returned to the lake 2 Fridays in a row, arriving before sunset to sit on the steps with a book she did not read. People in kayaks stroked in long, unhurried pulls. An old man threw a ball for a dog who insisted the game could not be over until both of them were too tired to continue. When she locked the cottage at night, the door gave the same cooperative click she had loved from the first week, and the sound felt like a simple agreement rather than a pledge. In May, Elena invited Nathan to the house for an hour on the patio. He arrived with no assumptions and 2 iced teas from the cafe, and they sat facing the yard that needed weeding. She told him what she could tolerate and what she could not. He answered what she asked and did not fill the space after with promises. The sky went lavender, then the kind of blue that keeps a little light in it. She did not touch his hand. He did not reach. When he stood to leave, he looked around the living room, the way a person glances at a place that has held them and will hold them differently. "I'll keep doing the work," he said, "with or without a result." "That's wise," she said, not to endorse the plan, but to recognize the sentence. He left his glass on the table, and the condensation ring pleased her in a way that felt nearly comic proof of cold, of presence of a thing that would evaporate on its own. The last day of school arrived with the usual rituals yearbooks with rushed signatures, a senior who cried for reasons she couldn't articulate, and laughed through at teachers making plans they wouldn't keep. Elena stacked her classroom's paper snowdrifts into boxes and labeled them with a thick marker. Room 212 Ward Fall, then erased the board and stood for an extra minute in the quiet. She pressed the heel of her hand to a smear of leftover chalk and left the faint white half-moon where it landed on her skirt. That evening, she drove to the lake with a bag of groceries and a bookstore paperback she had been saving. The cabin held its new paint like breath. She opened the windows and let air pass through from one side to the other. She cooked something simple and ate it on the steps with her feet on the lower stair. When the light thinned to that silvery hour that belongs to water, she set her plate in the sink and turned off the lamp. In the dark, the lake remade the shore in small laps that didn't ask permission. Elena stood with her palm on the doorframe she had repainted and felt the cool paint under the pads of her fingers. Nothing was tidy. Enough things stood where they stood. The rooms waited without drama. She lifted the 3 stones on the shelf and placed them in a line not to assign meaning, but to acknowledge weight. Then she let her hand fall to her side and listened until the sound of the water was the size of the room. Thank you so much for listening to today's story. If this story resonated with you or made you reflect, I'd love to hear your thoughts, so feel free to share them in the comments below. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you won't miss the next story. I'll see you next time as we continue exploring more journeys and lessons together.